Putting numbers into perspective, the Consumer Price Index. If you follow economic news, you've probably heard about index numbers such as the Producer Price Index, the Consumer Confidence Index, and the Consumer Price Index. Pause the video here to download the Consumer Price Index handout. You will need this handy for classroom and homework assignments throughout the rest of the first half of this course. An index number provides a simple way to compare measurements made at different times or in different places. The value at one particular time must be chosen. This value is referred to as the reference value or reference period. Please note that there is no particular method for rounding index numbers, but in this class we will typically round to the nearest tenth. The primary purpose of index numbers is to facilitate comparisons. By computing the ratio of the index numbers, we can compare prices across history. Suppose we want to know how much more expensive gas was in 1995 than in 1965. To find out how much higher or lower gas prices were in 1995 compared to 1965, we compute the ratio of these index numbers for the given years. We will not concern ourselves with calculating index numbers, but rather we should become comfortable reading tables such as this one. Make sure we can identify the price index or the index number for the given years. The reference here in this case is 1965, so that index number appears in the denominator. The ratio of the index numbers is roughly 3.91. The 1995 price was about 3.91 times the 1965 price. In other words, the amount of gas that cost $1 in 1965 costs approximately $3.91 in 1995. Suppose it cost $20 to fill your gas tank in 2005. How much did it cost to buy the same amount of gas in 1965? To find out how much higher or lower gas prices were in 2005 compared to 1965, we compute the ratio of these index numbers. The reference here in this case is 2005. If we know the cost or dollar amount of a given good or service, this will help us indicate the reference year. We see that gas that cost $20 in 2005 costs approximately $2.68 in 1965. We've seen that the price of gasoline has risen substantially with time. Most other prices and wages have also risen, a phenomenon we call inflation. Prices and wages occasionally decline with time, which is deflation. Changes in actual prices therefore are not very meaningful unless we compare them to the overall rate of inflation, which is measured by the Consumer Price Index. The Consumer Price Index, or CPI, measures the average level of the prices of goods and services consumed by the typical urban family. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports the CPI each month as it is used to monitor changes in the cost of living over time. The percentage increase in the CPI from one year to the next gives one measure of the annual rate of inflation. According to the U.S. Department of Labor, this market basket consists of commodities from such categories as food and beverage, housing, apparel, transportation, medical care, recreation, and educational expenses. The CPI allows us to compare overall prices at different times by computing a simple ratio. When the Consumer Price Index rises, the typical family has to spend more dollars to maintain the same standard of living. Let's take a look at the following example. In 1977, the price of a slice of pizza in Boston's Park Street subway station was 25 cents. What would be the cost of that slice of pizza in 2012 if we were just to account for inflation? Here's the average annual consumer price index we will be using for this class. Make sure that we can identify the CPI index number for the two given years. The ratio of the CPIs from one year to the next will tell us how much more or less expensive items were in the new year. The ratio of 229.6 to 60.6 indicates that generally items are roughly 3.79 times as expensive in 2012 as they were in 1977. So we see the price of a 25-cent slice of pizza in 1977 would be roughly equivalent to 95-cent slice of pizza in 2012 if we were just to account for inflation. Carlton's tuition in 2001 was $25,371, while his tuition in 2011 was $42,690. Did the price really go up after we account for inflation? Simply subtracting the 2 years of tuition is not enough to explain what is happening here. We can say, however, Carlton's tuition rose nominally by $17,319. But was that due to inflation alone, or were there other outside factors that influenced the increased cost of his tuition? We need to account for inflation first when making comparisons across time. To do this, we first must need to figure out how much more or less expensive items are in 2011 as compared to 2001. Make sure that we can identify the Consumer Price Index number for the two given years. The ratio of the CPIs from one year to the next will tell us how much more or less expensive these items were in the new year. The ratio of 224.9 to 177.1 indicates that items are roughly 1.27 times as expensive in the new year as they were in 2001. So we see that $25,371 in 2001 would be roughly equivalent to $32,218 in 2011. We can now see that Carlton's tuition rose in real terms by $10,472, or after we account for inflation, there was an added increase of tuition of $10,472. Try this example on your own. Has minimum wage kept up with inflation? Compare the change in minimum wage from 1980 to 2010. Pause the video here before moving to the solution on the next slide. The ratio of the CPIs from one year to the next will tell us how much more or less expensive items were in the new year. The ratio of 218.1 to 82.4 indicates that items are roughly 2.65 times as expensive in 2010 as they were in 1980. If minimum wage rose equally with inflation, we would expect the minimum wage in 2010 to be $8.22. Take a look at the minimum wage table on the next slide to determine if inflation kept up with minimum wage. Based on the data from the chart, we would say minimum wage has not kept up with inflation, since the actual minimum wage was $7.25 in 2010 as opposed to the expected $8.22. Try the next example on your own. If Bobby needed $25,000 to maintain a certain standard of living in 1986, how much would be needed to maintain the same standard of living in 2016? The ratio of the CPIs from one year to the next will tell us how much more or less expensive items were in the new year. The ratio of CPIs indicate that items are roughly 2.19 times as expensive in 2016 as they were in 1968. Bobby would need approximately $54,744.53 to maintain the same standard of living in 2016.